where were we? Andrew in Minnesota. Hello.
Yeah, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Great, thanks.
Great. So my main question, I guess, the main point that I'm looking for, I work with two pretty devout Muslim gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
It comes up in topic pretty much all the time that the Koran is perfect. It's the perfect word of God.
What kind of place?
There's a few.
What kind of place do you work at, if you don't mind me asking? I'm not going to ask for details, but
No problem. Honda car dealership.
oh, okay, got it.
Pretty diverse bunch of employees. It's pretty cool.
Sure,
and they're
yeah.
really
I mean,
friendly.
and
We're
good
friends,
for
hang out a
them,
lot.
I would say.
Oh yeah.
So go on.
And I mean, their main point really that comes up is that the way that the, I guess, linguistics are laid out in the Quran is something that can never be replicated by human beings, which I've looked up a little bit, but I haven't really seen any good points refuting that. Obviously, I don't believe that, but
This actually sounds like a great time to apply the outsider test. So you take this if you want to.
The thing is, I know my limitations, and I don't know enough about the Muslim faith to say that that's true or that's not true. But hearing what you said isn't the same thing as presenting any evidence. You see, I have to see the evidence, or I have to know of someone who's seen that kind of evidence. But everything I've seen about the Muslim faith, everything I've seen about any faith at all, is that it's something concocted, created, originated by people who needed to believe or control others.
I borrowed heavily from other religions.
What's that?
Borrowed heavily.
I always make the point to them, yes, most of it's borrowed heavily, and they try to use that as the point that it backs it up somehow.
Yeah. And I think it's a good policy to be honest and say that you don't know that much about Islam, including, when you are talking directly to Muslims. But the problem is, like, if you don't know something about Islam, it seems like it's up to the people who are trying to talk you into being a Muslim to convince you, basically, or to present this information in a way that is persuasive.
Right.
And it's perfectly all right to just, to just listen to these arguments and say, I don't know, you could flip through a couple of passages of the Quran. I have. It's not that good writing, personally. I mean,
well, of course, you have to speak the original language.
Oh,
to
sure.
absorb the text,
That'd be a lot.
Whatever
That'd take a lot of effort.
Language.
That'd take a lot of effort to determine the truth or the falsity of that claim. But there'd be some people who
Right.
could. What I would do is I would ask the person, and I do this with Christians all the time. They'll email me and they'll say, "Have you ever heard this argument?" And once in a while, they surprise me with an argument I hadn't considered because it had some detail that was left out of other arguments. And I'll say, "Oh no, I really hadn't considered this before." And they'll say, "Well, what do you think of it?" And I'll ask it, "Is this why you believe? Is this the reason? Is this the argument that if I were to debunk it, would convince you that your religion is false?" No, this is not why I believe. Well, why do you believe? Let's talk about that. It's about talking in terms of concrete examples.
Sure, yeah.
Why do you believe? You don't believe because of this argument, and the Muslim who has produced that argument for you didn't believe because of that argument. What you want to do is, if you don't know the specifics, which I don't in this case, when it comes to the Quran, I would simply say, why do you believe? Tell me the real reasons why you believe. And usually it comes down to I was raised that way. Now, once that is out on the boards, I usually say something like this. Now, given the proliferation of religions around the world that are taught on mama's knee, we know that they all can't be true. In fact, given the numbers of them, we know that most of them are false. And so you have to agree with me that learning your religion on mama's knee is a notoriously bad way to learn a religion. by the odds alone.
Although you're not going to get a theist admitting that the reason they believe is because that's what they learned as kids.
Right. You have to
Well, I've actually come close with both of them. One's from Egypt, one's from Somalia, and they both fully admit that that's what they were raised with. That's what they brought up. And I asked, well, would you believe the Quran was perfect if you had read it or hadn't read it until this point in your life? Would you just now read it and immediately go, oh, that's a perfectly written book? And I think it kind of stuck, but I mean, obviously they weren't like instantly.
Here's a question that occurs to me, which is that these are guys who have lived in both America and, you said, Egypt for one of them, right?
Correct.
And I think one line of questioning that might yield some interesting results is saying, you've lived in these two places. Isn't it weird how the religion that a person believes in seems to map so strongly to their physical location, that they just happen to believe exactly the same things as most other people around them? And see what kind of reaction that gets, because, they must feel very pressed to defend their faith, specifically because they run into almost nobody in their day-to-day lives who also believes in Islam. And that's kind of unusual if it's just objective truth, isn't it?
We're living in a global society now. Internet can take you around the world in a split second, and there's nobody who can be totally ignorant about the fact that so many people believe differently. And so if you can get someone to say, yes, I was raised to believe in a country, then you can use what Peter Boghossian talks about as a Socratic method, where you're talking in terms of, well, how sure can you be that you were raised correctly? And take them through the kinds of arguments that street epistemologists would do, and then try one by one lead that person to say, well, you know what? If I were born in, say, Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is where I was born, I would probably be, a Christian of some kind, which I was. My mom was a Protestant, my dad was a Catholic, and since she had to sign on one way or the other, when we were born, we became Catholics until such time as his parents died. And when his parents died, then she could do whatever she wanted. She started going to a Protestant church, and all of a sudden I started going to that Protestant church. I became a minister in that Protestant church. So talk about the kinds of things that why don't you believe what you would have been raised to be somewhere else? And then press upon them the outsider test of faith afterward, or in the process. And but the argument he gave you is not the reason he believed. We have to get beyond trying to answer these arguments. Yes, there are people who can.
An point. I don't want to take up any more of you guys' time. That was really an excellent point. I'll take that to heart.
All right.
Thank you guys so much for the show, and really, really appreciate what you guys do.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for calling, Andrew. See you later. And also, just to finish another thought that I started earlier, it seems to me that the question of whether the Quran is perfect, so to speak, that's not really a matter of fact. It's a matter of literary criticism. And it can be intimidating to be talking to somebody who asserts with absolute confidence that their opinion about something is the correct and only opinion. But there's nothing wrong with meeting an opinion with another opinion. A lot of people like the movie Interstellar, including Neil deGrasse Tyson. I thought it was kind of crappy. Bring on the hate mail. But that was on my mind because I was arguing about it with somebody yesterday. But the opinion that Interstellar is good or bad is not entirely a true or false question, any more than the question that the Quran is a perfect or wonderfully written book. A lot of that comes down to, what do you think of it? And there's nothing wrong with just saying, no, it's not, without having any supporting arguments.
Yeah, I guess I'd have to know what a perfectly written book in Arabic would be, and
right.
That's just too much effort for me. So I leave it to someone else to look at that, and it's not going to be me.
Yeah. All right. Well.